Welcome back to the show, everybody. I'm Gina.
And I'm Evo.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Whoa.
What happened?
And the volume kind of peaked in there.
Oh, okay. In your headphones?
Yeah.
So I'm so happy to be back this Friday. And even though the topic that we're going to talk about it's a little heavy, I'm still excited to talk about it. So today we are talking about toxic exes.
Kim and Kanye. Oh. Is there an echo in here?
The reason why we decided to talk about this is because recently I read on Yahoo that Kanye is looking to admit himself into some sort of facility that will help him with his behavioral issues and, quote, be a better man and be a better father.
Good. I mean, I think that that's the responsible thing to do.
I would agree. And it's no surprise to anybody that he suffers from mental illness. He is bipolar. So there are a lot of things that are built into who Kanye is and potentially why he is behaving the way he is behaving amidst the breakup the divorce rather between him and his wife, because she is now officially divorced from him. I don't really follow this Kim and Kanye thing. I think the reason why that popped up in my feed was because I was researching toxic exes and, kind of what goes into that type of behavior or that type of relationship. And I found it surprising. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting.
So before you move on from that, I just wanted to point out that I watched the Kanye special.
Oh, did you?
It's a 3-episode special, where there's a guy, I forgot the guy's name, but he's like a videographer, and he ends up recording Kanye's whole career, back from when he was in Chicago.
Okay.
There was a station called Channel Zero, and the guy used to film for Channel Zero, and at the same time he was recording Kanye. And he has footage of Kanye's whole career from even before he even came to New York and started messing with Rockefeller. And it's very clear that Kanye's downfall was when his mother died.
Okay.
That's when his life just kind of started to spiral out of control. So even though that he was dealing with mental issues, he still had it very well together with his mother by his side. And it just seemed like that after that's when everything just went downhill for him.
Okay. And I think I've said this in the past. I completely understand that. I come from a trauma-ridden past. And I want to say this lightly. Even though you suffer from mental illness, even though you suffer from something trauma-related, that I still don't think that gives you the right to intentionally hurt other people.
Of course not. No, I was just bringing this up. I was bringing this up because I'm sure, like myself, if you're a fan of Kanye, you at some point you wondered, what happened?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This person that, me personally, speaking for myself, still love so much of his music. He was such an inspiration to me, such a big part of my life. And to see someone like that spiral out of control at some point in the height of their career with so much success, it's kind of heartbreaking a bit. And you kind of left to wonder what happened,
Yeah.
You would think that, looking from the outside, somebody like that, they have it all. And it turns out, it's a cliche story that it's lonely at the top and it's not really what it is. And there's a lot of things that make a person unhappy, even though they're very, very successful. And so, in reference to Kanye, I know I found answers for myself in the special that he had, and that it was clear that, it was after his mother died that he really kind of lost control of his emotions.
Okay. I know you have a soft spot for Kanye.
I do. It's sad, but
I don't think it's sad, but I know that you have a soft spot for him because you and I are on opposite ends of that conversation when it comes to Kanye. So the fact that he is walking around being a toxic ex, buying the property right next door to Kim and, coming out with songs talking about what he's going to do to her current boyfriend. And there are some other video clips of things that Kanye has said to Kim while they were in a relationship, things like he doesn't want her wearing certain things going out. She's the mother of his kids. Things that seemed very controlling because when they entered the relationship, Kim was who she was.
Right.
And later on, it seemed like Kanye wasn't okay with that, even though I feel like he even built her up to be that way, which makes a lot of sense based on what I now understand are the levels of what it is to be a toxic person. or to be in a toxic relationship, and how the abusive partner or partners can have levels of their relationship and in the end what it will come out to be. But before I get into that, I want to just start off by giving what is the definition of toxic people, because it doesn't necessarily have to be in a relationship. It could just be a toxic person. So according to psychologist Dr. Lillian Glass, author of the book Toxic People, a toxic relationship is any relationship between people who don't support each other, where there's conflict and one seeks to undermine the other, and there's a lack of cohesiveness.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. I actually continued reading on the article that this author and psychologist, really goes in depth of what makes someone toxic in a relationship. And I was pretty surprised, because you think that someone that is behaving in the manner of toxicity, you don't necessarily think that they have a plan, that there are levels to this shit. Come to find out that there is, whether or not that they are aware of it or the person that is being abused is aware of it, it's happening at different phases. And the reason why I was so surprised is because I myself was in a relationship where there was emotional and physical abuse once upon a time. And now, understanding the phases of being in a toxic relationship, I 100% went through those phases. And it fucking bugs me out. Because you don't really think that there's like a psychology behind that. You think of toxic people, you think sometimes, oh, this guy or girl, they're crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's called a psychological profile.
Oh.
It's how, I got that from like, murder mystery shows and how they profile, psycho killers and things like that. And that would be a psychological profile of a toxic person.
So let's get into the phases. First and foremost, it starts off with the idolization phase. And in this phase, there's a term that starts to happen. It's called love bombing. At this point, your partner is overwhelming you with all types of affection, words of affirmation, taking you out on dates, giving you gifts, surprising you with things, just
building you up.
Yeah, they're building you up. They are making you feel like you are everything. And in turn, you then feel like you have found the one. Mm-hmm. Because they're giving you all of those, fairy tale things. You're beautiful. I love you. Here's gifts. I'm surprising you. I'm taking you here. We're doing this. And they're giving you so much attention that what it's doing is creating this craving inside of you for this person, for this other person.
Right. Yeah. They're setting a level of expectation from you.
Yeah.
That what a toxic person, I'm sure is going to follow, is that they eventually at some point they flip the switch, knock all that shit down, drop you to the floor, and all of a sudden you're left wanting this pedestal that you were on, and now almost feeling like you need to appease this person and please them in a way, their ego or whatever it is, so that they go back to being that person that they was.
I like how Evo didn't roll the dice, but then he just jumped space. He said, I know what happens next.
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of feel like, based on our conversation, and I didn't even know if that you were going to go into that next, but I could just already see that playing out like that.
Yeah. I think it's very easy to make that sort of assessment when you're on the outside looking in, because when this shit is happening to you, you have almost no clue. Yeah. Because when it goes to the second phase, which is the devaluation phase, whereas the abuser will start to devalue you as their partner, as their significant other, as their husband or wife. And they will start to do this with verbal abuse, name calling, condescending sarcasm, an immediate withdrawal of affection. They will start to minimize or completely withdraw gift giving, surprises. And they will also start to instill a sense of worthlessness to the partner that they are abusing with the name calling, with the emotional abuse. They will start to pick at things in their partner that they know are weaknesses. Because in the first stage, the love bombing, you feel so secure and you feel so comfortable with this person that you open up and you tell them all your deep, dark secrets. Maybe things that have happened to you, maybe things that you're insecure about. And then what do? They turn that shit around on you, like you said. They then use that against you to belittle you as a person, to make you feel worthless. And you almost then start to feel like, wow, am I really somebody that isn't valuable? Am I worthless?
Right. Well, yeah, you're looking at this person that you care for. You see them as valuable to you because at one point they were making you feel like you're on top of the world.
Correct.
And you've opened up to this person. You've shared some of your most vulnerable secrets about yourself, in connecting with that person, and then they turn around, flip the switch on you. And then now they're using that information to belittle you. And so now you're looking at this person who you care about what they say, saying things about you that are negative. And I can see how a person might feel like, wow, well, this person knows me and they're saying these things about me. So, there must be something to it, and then immediately devaluing themselves. That's fucked up. That's real fucked up.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
yeah, absolutely. Then there's another stage, and I was about to say the last stage. It's essentially the last stage, but there is like one subcategory after this one that sometimes happens and sometimes doesn't happen. But the third stage is the discard phase. Discard phase, and this phase is what it sounds like. They fucking get rid of you. They discard you, or they then discard all of your feelings. You literally at this point mean nothing to them. And what they've done up until this point is that the abuser has done a really good job of making you feel like you're fucking crazy. So when they started off by saying, I love you, you're beautiful, and they give you all these things, and then they turn around and they start to manipulate you in the way where they start to pick at things about you that you have shared with them. When you start to react to those things, they gaslight you. They're like, what are you talking about? You're crazy. These things about you are things that you've talked to me about. Maybe you should work on them. They're making you feel like your state of mind is abnormal. It's not welcomed, and it's all part of their plan. And this is why when I thought about this, I said to myself, wow, it doesn't seem like someone who is toxic and will then be the abuser in a relationship, like they go into this with a plan. But obviously, this is something that many partners will do to their significant other. And I think what's even crazier is that sometimes this can happen simultaneously.
Yeah. So what I'm getting is that they're using information that you have given to them in confidence and putting it against you to make you feel like there's something wrong with you.
Yes, 100%. And that's that is the essence of gaslighting.
Yeah.
So once they discarded you, whether they dump you or they let's say maybe you're married and you're still coexisting. And now it's basically like you are nobody to them, even though you may still be in the same presence. What potentially could happen at this point is the person that has been abused, the partner that has been abused the entire time, is now trauma bonded to this abuser. And they feel stuck. Because they are, for the most part, reflecting upon a time when their relationship was in the first phase.
Yeah.
When they had all that love, when they had all that attention, when they had all that time.
And the infatuation was just on 10.
Yes. Because at that point, the abuser has made the abusee feel like they were everything to them. And the abusee feels like this person is the one for me.
Yeah.
So now they're stuck in this cycle because even though there's phases, this phase can repeat itself. It can go from the discarding phase back to the initial phase because the abuser is noticing that potentially the partner that they've been abusing the whole time wants to exit. Because sometimes when someone's toxic or narcissistic and they only care about their feelings, they like the presence of other people.
Could it be that the partner that's being abused all of a sudden starts acting in a way that the abuser is looking for them to act, and then therefore they kind of reward them and start giving them some of the treatment that it is that they're looking for?
So I think that that's possible. I don't necessarily think that the abuser, the toxic person, is actually ever really looking for this person to behave in a particular way, because it's really about them. It's really about the abuser. It's how they feel.
Right.
It's about their power journey over someone else. So I really don't think that there's something that someone else could ever do that will satisfy them, because they need help.
Yeah, definitely need help. So what does one do if they find themselves in a situation where they're in a relationship with someone that's toxic and that person is being abusive to them?
Well, I think it definitely depends. It definitely depends on the type of abuse that you are experiencing, because we do know that there are different types of abuse.
Right.
There's emotional abuse, there's physical abuse, and then there's one that I found very surprising: financial abuse, which is where one of the partners will keep their financials, keeping them over the other partner. So like, say for example, stay-at-home mom, and in that particular realm they feel like they are stuck. I'm not a psychologist. I can't give advice to someone and say, this is what I think you should do. What I can tell you is what I did. This is the advice that I would like to give. My past relationship, where I was in a toxic relationship, and it was actually toxic on both ends. We hurt each other. There was just a physical part on the other end that was not being reciprocated. And I mean physical abuse. It honestly, nothing anybody told me, nothing anybody tried to do for me is what helped me get out. It literally got to the point one day where I felt like I was not living my life. My life was being controlled by someone that, when I seeked out to be more ambitious, to be more of a go-getter, I was being pulled back by this person that wanted to control me, because it had a lot to do with their own insecurities. And I was young when this was happening, so I didn't understand that. I just felt as they themselves had issues that they were dealing with, but they were kind of like somewhat taking them out on me, and I felt bad for them, which is, I think, the crazy part, because this is the trauma bonding part.
Right.
You're so traumatized from what you're going through that you almost, what's that Stockholm syndrome, you almost become connected to your captor somewhat. Not that I was in capture or anything. So for me, it was a switch. And what I mean by a switch was, there was one particular incident where I was told that I could not do something. And then some of my personal items were damaged. And that was the breaking point for me. I reached the point where I felt as I was not being allowed to live my life as Gina. And I needed to break free from that. And breaking free meant, for me, walking away from everything with the clothes on my back, and then figuring out every step after that. I had friends at that time that I was going through this, that every day would say to me, I don't know why you're putting up with this. I don't know why you're letting this man do this to you. You know, I got a lot of that thing that you hear when someone's in an abusive relationship. Why are you letting this person do this to you? And then what I think is crazy too is that a lot of that, the devaluation was happening. I was being told that I was crazy for thinking the way you're treating me is wrong. You know, I was being told, no, you're doing this, you're making me do this to you. Those are a lot of the things that I heard. And I just remember year after year just feeling like, okay, maybe if I behave a particular way, this person will be happy, and then maybe we could go back to the beginning. And luckily, I realized that that was not what was going to happen. So my advice is just try to remind yourself that you are valuable and that the abuse that you're receiving is not your fault, as hard as it may seem, especially when you have children or if you're married.
Or you're being convinced by your abuser that it is your fault.
Yeah. When you're stuck in a situation like that, I truly believe that there has to be an individual breaking point for somebody. And sadly, I think that there are some women and some men that never reach that breaking point, and they are either stuck in that situation for, into the point to where they lose their lives. And I would also encourage the person that is being abused, or if it's happening on both ends, to potentially seek some sort of counseling or some sort of therapy, because I think that's the only way, going back to Kanye, is to seek out, why are you having these behavioral actions towards another human being? Why are you doing these things? It's coming from somewhere, and now that I am able to look back upon my past relationship, I know that the person that was abusing me at that time had significant amount of trauma themselves.
Yeah, I think that I think that one of the most important parts of someone that is toxic finding help is obviously identifying that there is an issue that they need to change and that they need help with. So if someone finds himself in a relationship where they feel that their partner is toxic, a key thing to do would, in my opinion, would be to try to see if that person, the toxic person, is willing to identify or in somewhat way admit that they do have an issue or there is something going on with them. I think that is a key thing to identify in order to be able to determine whether there is a possibility that this thing that's going on between you and this toxic person that you're with has a chance in changing. So I would suggest to someone that may be in the situation to try to identify that, because that's the first step of anything turning around, is the toxic person actually admitting that there is something that needs to be changed in order for there even being like a remote chance of anything changing. And if the person, the abuser, the victim, doesn't see that, then maybe they might want to try to seek options on exiting that situation, because in reality there's no solution. If problems are between two people are solved between two people, they must have to come to an agreement and work through it together. And if the person that you're having a problem with, if you as a victim and your abuser, you're trying to maybe see if they can get help, if they're refusing to admit that there's an issue, then there's not going to be any resolution. And so as sad as it sounds, sometimes you just got to walk away,
I think that when I hear you say that, I know where that's coming from. And tell me if I'm wrong, but that sounds like the advice that is given to an addict. The first stage of recovery is to admit that you are addicted to something.
Yeah, well, I mean, it comes more from myself and knowing that some of the most flawed characteristics about myself that I've changed in my life only happened because I was able to identify them. And I can look back at them now and look at those as decisions, as great decisions that I made for myself to better myself. So someone who is toxic.
But it depends. I think it depends on what type of toxic person they are, because let's just be clear that there are some that have a lot of. It's not that easy. Like, there needs to be multiple steps.
Yes, there needs to be multiple steps. But I believe that the first step comes from looking in the mirror and saying something about what I'm seeing has to change. That's like, I feel like the first initial step from within that kind of sprouts the seed.
Yeah.
And I'm only speaking from my own experience. You
Yeah.
know, some of the things that I've changed about myself that have been the most significant started with me looking at myself in the mirror and saying, what you just did or what you've been doing that's not it. Like, you need to do something about this. Like, I'm identifying with myself that there's something about myself that needs to change, and that's the first step. So going back to what I was saying, for two people in a relationship, if the victim is not able to get the toxic person that they're with, the abuser, to somehow identify this characteristic within themselves, then you may have a problem resolving that issue as a couple in the long run.
Yeah.
And may want to seek a different alternative for your life. And if there's children involved, then you want to think about them and, and their well-being as well in that situation. I mean, ultimately, the best thing to do would be to work it out with your partner and grow together, understand each other, change with each other, and kind of like ride out into the sunset, right? Like, I mean, I think, in my personal opinion, that would be the ideal situation.
Yes, if it's workable.
If it's workable, yes, of course. But again, going back to what I was saying, I only see the opportunity as it being workable is if the abuser, the toxic person, is able to admit that there's something that they personally within themselves need to work on.
Yeah.
That's the key takeaway for me. If an abuser can't get their toxic partner to even admit it, then how? No, you mean, because okay. I said if the victim is what I meant to say. Sorry.
Yeah.
So if the victim cannot get their toxic partner to even admit that they're toxic in any way, which way whatsoever, then I mean, what are we solving? In order to solve a problem, you have to identify it first.
Yeah, and that's a vicious cycle, because I'm going to tell you why that's potentially somewhat dangerous. Is because if you're trying to get the toxic partner to admit that they have toxicity, that there's a characteristic about them that makes them behave in that way, you then can be faced with the gaslighting of, you're crazy. What the fuck are you talking about? I'm not like that. It's you. You make me like this.
Yeah.
Because I've heard that many times in my life. I've heard men and women say things about their partner in the regard of, he or she made me like this. He or she made me do these things that I've done to them. And once upon a time, I potentially understood that somewhat, because you could be in a situation with a significant other where you get into an argument and what they say to you makes you really angry.
Yeah.
So something that I read that was so enlightening to me is, one of the key issues with when you're dealing with someone who's toxic is their inability to change the word you to I. So example is, if two people are in an argument and the abuser then says to the victim, you made me angry, their inability to change that statement and say, I am now angry by the words that you used against me. If they can interchange the I, then there's some sort of realization that I am in control of my own feelings. The things that you say to me, they have angered me. But I am feeling like this. You didn't make me feel like this. And this is something that you and I, more recently, I read a book about self-awareness that really helped me understand that. So when I am in some sort of dispute with you, I have to remind myself sometimes that regardless of what is being said to me, I'm the one in the seat. I'm the driver.
Yeah, well, that's easier said than done.
Oh, well, hello. I am in my 40s and I'm fucking just reading a book that I sat back and I was like, holy fuck. I think the best example that I could think of that the book helped me really understand was, I want to say maybe a couple weeks after I had finished the book, Mateo and I, our middle son, I was driving and a guy almost hit us. And, after I made sure that Mateo was okay, I then immediately wrangled my feelings and I said to myself, I'm okay. He's okay. I'm not going to let this spoil my day, because we were off to go do something nice that day and I just drove off.
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier to say. It's a lot easier to say, you made me angry.
Yeah.
Instead of, I lost control of my feelings.
Correct.
So, but here's an interesting question. What makes a person a toxic person? What makes someone a toxic person? Like, how does a guy or a girl enter a relationship and end up being a toxic person? How do they get to that point? What are some of the things that bring those characteristics out of a person?
Are you asking my personal opinion?
Yeah, I'd like to know your personal opinion.
Well, based off of my own experience, it was their own insecurities and it was their own trauma from childhood and how they viewed women that made that man do the things that he did to me. The way he behaved to me was based on how he himself experienced abuse as a young man from the hands of people that were supposed to be his caretakers.
Yeah.
So then when he became of age to take care of himself, he always wanted to have control. And him wanting to always have control meant if I wanted to do something that was outside of those parameters, there needed to be a way where he could reel me back in. And sometimes that strategy was not something that was like, hey, I'm feeling a way about this. Could you not go out tonight? No, it was, I'm actually going to fucking bleach your clothes and tell you that you're a fucking whore for wearing red lipstick. Those were the type of tactics because when you feel a lack of sense of control, you feel out of control, right?
Yeah.
So if you feel out of control, that sometimes is coupled with anger. And when you have anger and you potentially then are trying to expel it, it comes out all fucked up. It's not coming out like, hey, babe, I'm feeling away tonight. No, it comes out like, hey, you fucking bitch. Or, like we said, all the devaluing, all the verbal abuse comes out.
Yeah.
But I think it comes from trauma, potential past trauma, a lack of understanding of like control. Maybe one time you have been in a situation, because I can say that as a young person, I was in situations where I had no control of what was happening to me. And then when you get older, you're like, I want to control everything because I'm never going to let what happened to me
Exactly.
when I was younger happen to me again. So if it involves another human being, I'm going to put in the work to make sure that I have the control over that.
It's either like, so there's a phrase that I heard the other day, and it's like, as far as it's either, so in life, you're either hustling or you're getting hustled. Right. And so in the situation of a toxic person and them being in a relationship with someone who is, we're going to call them a victim, the toxic person at one point in their life, they were the victim. They had some type of relationship with somebody where they were the victim of a toxic relationship with someone. And once they've come out of that situation, looking back at their life, tell themselves never again. And in order for that to never happen again, that involves refusing to be a victim. And so if they see themselves as the victim and identify who they were as a victim, the only thing that they know that is opposite of that was their toxic abuser. And so they easily take that role to never sit or step into the victim role ever again. And so people end up.
Wow, that's.
It's basically what you said in a nutshell.
Yeah, but you said that so much because I was just basing that off of pure experience because I was the victim. Yeah. But then I don't want to, and I'm not trying to downplay this past relationship that I had. I don't think I was ever an abuser, but there were moments that I was toxic.
Yeah, I mean, I was, thinking about our relationship and some of the things that I've changed about myself in our relationship. I can look back at those characteristics and I'm mature enough to say, wow, those were some toxic, traits that I had that I changed about myself. But it takes someone, right? So wait, let's just dial it back for a second.
Okay.
So that is one way that
you end up being the toxic
you
individual.
end up well, that's what you end up being the toxic individual, or yes, that is one way. Another way is if you're in a relationship with someone, and same thing, where you're a victim of a toxic person, and then once that relationship ends and you move on to the next one, you then become the toxic person in that relationship. But here's what also can happen. It doesn't always work out like that. The person who was the victim in a toxic relationship can move forward and not become the toxic person, but become wiser to be able to identify a toxic person if they ever cross their path, and potentially be able to help that person work through those toxic traits.
I think that's exactly what happened between you and I.
It's exactly what happened between you and I. So that's why I wanted to kind of point out, how does one get there, and what are the different outcomes of a person who is either been in a toxic relationship and moved on, or end up being having like some childhood trauma and having family or an ordeal that they were raised by a toxic person, and then kind of like being that toxic person, just refusing to be a victim.
You know, looking back on my ex and looking back at that past relationship, I remember once upon a time, as a child, I watched my mother be physically abused, and there was physical, verbal abuse. And I remember growing up saying, never will I ever fucking let that happen to me. And I was doing what most people do, not being in that situation myself, saying that I would never let that happen to me. I was from the outside looking in. And what I now understand is that when you're in, or you find yourself in a toxic relationship, and let's say it's not at the level of physical abuse, let's say, it's verbal, not that that's any less worse, but, or it's some sort of financial, like one of those other examples that I gave, the abuse happens slowly. It is not like you day one, they're like, by the way, I think you're a piece of shit. That it doesn't happen. And I think the analogy that one of the authors used is how you could cook a lobster. And you can cook a lobster by throwing that shit in a hot ass boiling water right off the bat, or you can turn on the flame, put the lobster in when the water is starting to boil, but in the end, the result is the same. They're still going to be cooked, but it's just how you got there.
Death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Yeah. So this type of toxicity in a relationship evolves through, like I said, the phases. And even though we said phases, I want people to know that could happen over years, over decades. It makes me think about a recent conversation that I had with a young man that, made the statement of, women make bad choices. And this is why they end up with men leaving the home. And I can tell you from experience and from having many women in my life that there are many instances where you meet a man and he's doing all of those things, all that love bombing. That first phase, he's making you feel like $1 million fucking dollars, right? And then what do? You get married, you have a child, and then fucking 5 years in, they're like, actually, by the way, I think you're fucking fat. And I think that you this and that. And you're like, what the fuck did I get myself into?
Yeah. Well, this is why it's important to, and this is so cliche, and I know people have heard it 1,000 times, but I really think that it makes sense now that we're speaking about toxic people in this way. It's really important to take things slow in a relationship.
Yeah.
It's really important to get to know somebody, because a lot of people overlook the infatuation phase. They meet somebody, everything is great, there's this huge attraction, both people are putting their best foot forward, and it's easy to forget that in these times, all of those bad characteristics that somebody has about themselves, they're holding those back. Nobody's coming out. Maybe, in a rare situation, but if you're trying to impress somebody, you're putting out all your best cards.
You know what I'm sorry to cut you off, but that reminds me, like when we play spades, I'm like, bitch, I'm holding the joker
so you're holding all your, you're putting out all your best cards. And that's, like a lot of people end up doing that because, they want to impress the person that they're dating or the person that they're seeing. what one needs to remember is that if it's a show, if it's something that's a facade, that's fake, a person can only keep that up for so long.
Yeah.
Right? So people always have to remember that there's the infatuation phase, and I like to label that 9 months to a year. Right? I feel like between 9 months to a year is a good time for somebody to really be with two people to be together and date each other and really for a year hold up their best foot forward. The second year, the infatuation kind of starts to die down a little bit. People, you're getting comfortable now with the person that you're with. So at that point, true colors kind of start to show. You're really going to get an idea now of who the person that you're dating really is, because now there's the comfortable sets in. And that's when you have the opportunity to see some of the characteristics that may resemble a person who has toxic traits.
Yeah.
And so at that point, if you make it through the second year, then the third year, for me, this is my personal opinion, is really when I'm able to decide for sure whether these last 2 years, the first year was great. The second year, I got to get to know a lot about this person that I don't like. Do I want to keep going here? So it's important to take things slow. I've learned that because I've rushed into a lot of relationships that ended up being, I ended up being with toxic people. I've picked up toxic characteristics along the way myself.
Yeah, and then you tried to lay that shit on me, and I was like,
well,
nah, fam. How about no?
They worked on me, so I'm like, they're gonna work on somebody, and that's the thing.
Yeah,
that is the thing, So, but that is why when we got back together, I was so like, we're gonna take this slow. We're gonna take this slow because I've found out that rushing into things, eventually getting too serious too quick, you end up finding out things about a person that you may have overlooked.
Yeah.
And then being in regret.
Because then you become blindsided.
Yeah. You're like.
Because you've been love bombed the whole time.
You've been love bombed the whole time. You fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. You're in. You're thinking that everything is great. And then the infatuation goes away and the true colors start to come out. Who the person really is that you're dating starts to come out. And if they're a toxic person, then that makes it even worse because it's like you didn't see it coming.
Yeah.
But if you went into the relationship with the mindset of like, okay, I'm going to give this 2 years. I'm going to put a probationary, there's no need to say, okay, we're not dating or we're not going to be anything for 2 years. You can be whatever, but just know that you need 2 years to really be able to look at the person that you're with and say, I know this person. It's not going to happen in 6 months. No way. And in a year, a person can keep a facade up for a year. But after 2 years, and it's something about the second year, when you look at something, you're like, oh, I did that for a year. People put years behind them. So there's a psychological thing that happens for someone that's putting up a facade, that after they've been doing it for a year, there's so many other things that they're moving on to into the new year that they're likely to move on to the next phase of the relationship that they have with that person. Therefore, thinking that it's good now, I'm in there, I can start relaxing and showing some of my true colors. And as long as the potential victim has is keeping an open eye for this change in characteristics, then at least they can say, well, I was hoping for the best, but I always expected the worst.
Yeah.
Which is one of my mottos. I try to live a lot of my scenarios or things that I go into by that was how I hope for the best and expect the worst, so that way I'm never really blindsided, because it's the ones that you don't see coming that hurt the most.
That is 1000% true.
Yeah. So
I think it's so interesting that you pointed out that how our relationship started. I came from a toxic relationship. I was the victim. You were in toxic relationships. You weren't the abuser. You weren't necessarily the victim.
No.
But you were in relationships where the two of you were kind of going at it in ways, and then you picked up behaviors from these relationships that when you and I started dating, when I noticed them, I was like, whoa, hang on a second. I know that this man has some significant depth. I know he has an amazing heart, But what's going on right here is kind of, I guess the best way I can put it, it was like you were like a barking dog, in the sense of, have you ever seen a lot of these videos that are circulating like on social media where someone finds a dog that has been neglected for a very long time, and when you first approach the dog, they're barking and they're being, they're on the defense mode. But then when you start to show them that, here, I'm just here to help you, and here I'm not a threat, they open up, and then you start to see their tail wagging. I feel like that's what happened between you and I. You had these things about you where you would blow up in a way where I would say to myself, there's something else there.
Yeah, well, I mean,
it wasn't actually about the situation that just happened. There's something else brewing here.
yeah, and in all of my relationships, problems were never really spoken about. Difference in emotional and difference of opinions weren't really, they weren't things that you talked through.
Yeah.
I was argued through these things.
Yeah.
So my emotions were something that I dealt with in an argument type of state.
Yeah, you were very volatile.
Yes, and that's just the way that it always was. I was like that at home, and then I was like that in all of my relationships. You were actually the first person where, in time, we ended up talking through our problems.
Yeah, because I wasn't about that rah-rah shit.
You know what I'm saying? And fortunately, I was able to recognize the benefit and in that, and how productive it can be for a relationship.
And I'm not trying to toot my own horn. The reason why I say I wasn't about that rah-rah shit is because, like I said before, in the past relationship, my ex-partner and we were toxic to each other. So I was very volatile. I did things that were deemed crazy. And you and I have joked about some of these things that I've told you that I've done. So there were moments when you'd blow up and I go, I don't think me going off the meat rack right now would be, and what I mean by that is me going just to the same level as crazy as him is going to be helpful, because I've done that in the past and I know that it does not help. I really need to control the way that my emotions are bubbling right now, and just walk away from this and then reassess. I thank God that I did that, because you were the type of individual that if I put just a little bit of fuel to your fire, that shit was everything was engulfed.
You didn't have to put the fuel in my fire. All you had to do was bring it in proximity, and that shit was gonna ignite. Like there was no, you didn't have to add it. Do you forget that? You just kind of bring it in my vicinity, and everything just ignited. But the beautiful part was that I realized that with all that rah-rah and arguing and whatever, and in the end, after the smoke clears, you end up talking. You end up having to go back and apologize about the way that you were acting or the way that I was acting, and then at that point speak through the issue that we're having in a calm, clear setting.
It took two things, though. It took for me to point it out, and it took for you to self-reflect.
Right. So this is why I was speaking about earlier, that because I was able to self-reflect and see myself and reflect back on a lot of the discussions that we've had in our relationship, I was able to just see that if I could just take out the argumentative part of it, the anger portion of it, we could just skip right to the resolution and talk.
Yeah.
Because that's where we would always end up in one way or another. That's where it ended.
Yeah.
And that's where kind of things, we found peace and resolution, and we moved on. Which was the best part of it all, right? The makeup part of it.
Yeah.
And so I was able to identify with myself, like, I have to cut that out. I can't keep bringing that to the relationship because it's unproductive.
Yeah.
I could understand maybe if you were like that and I used that as a way to combat you, because I didn't want to get bulldozed by you, then maybe I could see how that might be beneficial for me. We were just screaming at each other and stuff like that. But, that wasn't your style, and I'm after a while, I kind of just started to look at myself like, yo, you're really not bringing anything positive to the situation with this characteristic. So I had to put that to rest.
Yeah.
But it took me seeing it within myself, and it also took you. I feel like you guided me. You were they say attitude is a reflection of leadership. So when it comes to the two people discussing their issues, you led the way in how that should be how it can be done in a productive way between us. And so I had to look back on that and reflect on what guided us through most of the time to the resolution, and say my attitude needs to be a reflection of that. And so then I started to I found help in the way that you kind of
simmered you down.
Yeah. So
like Evil's brother said at our wedding, I put the brakes on you.
Yes, you did. You definitely put the brakes on me in more than a few ways.
But but vice versa.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
Evil definitely put the brakes on me. But that's another conversation.
That's another conversation.
But I think in a nutshell, what you're saying is that if you're in a relationship with someone who's exhibiting toxic behaviors, it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that relationship potentially could not go into a better realm.
Yes.
There is potential for the two people to grow.
Yes.
If there is some sort of recognition from the potential abuser, or if both of you are being toxic in some facet, if you are willing to say, this is getting us nowhere. We are literally just fucking rocking a boat in a circle, and we're never going to get to land at this point. If the two of you are willing to recognize that, or the abuser is willing to recognize it and seek help, however you choose to do that as a couple, there is a rainbow potentially there's a rainbow at the end of the road. I guess
there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
There's a light at the end of the tunnel is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
But there are definitely situations, I can speak from experience, that there is no light at the end of the tunnel, and you have to fucking hit the eject button.
Right.
For your own fucking sanity. But there's one phase that I said earlier that is part of the whole toxic relationship phases that sometimes happens, sometimes doesn't. And it's called the hovering phase. And it happens after the discarded phase. After this, the abuser, the person that was being toxic to their partner, says, okay, I don't want you anymore. What does one like to do when you're potentially a narcissist, when you're toxic? You try to pull them back in. And you hover.
Yeah.
And you do it from a distance. You do it in a way that seems very non-threatening. But you try to implement little facets of, or little portions of the love bombing. So maybe you DM them quietly and you say, hey, you look beautiful in that picture. I'm sorry that I was such a jerk. Or, you like one of their posts, or, you send them a happy birthday text. You do things that seem so subtle and so, there's a word, and I love the word, and I want to say the word, covertly, like you're doing like a fucking operation, but it's a very almost, it's a way to get the victim back in without them feeling like you are a potential threat.
Right. Or it's a way for you to stay. It's a way for the toxic person to stay in the person that they were dating in their life.
Oh yeah.
To possibly sabotage them.
Oh
in
yeah.
Ways from ever moving forward.
100%.
I think a toxic person, in most cases, does not want to see their ex move on and be happy.
For sure.
Even though the toxic person has moved on, they don't want to see their ex in that.
And that goes back to the lack of control. That goes back to them saying, oh, I was not able to gain full control over this individual.
Yeah.
So now I need to do something to get them back in my grasp. And they do it so subtle that sometimes the victim doesn't even realize that they're, they get the what you doing text, and, there's memes I've seen about this when they're like, I'm never going to talk to this motherfucker again. I'm blocking them. And they hit you up like, you hungry? And you're like, oh, yeah.
What's funny is that it does exist in that subtle way, but it also exists in a way that if two people have been together long enough and they end up breaking up, the toxic person almost feels like they have it's like they have no respect for their ex's boundaries.
Like they have a right to them?
They have a right to them. Like the toxic person somehow convinces themselves that, this ain't over. This is never going to be over. Like, I don't care if you moved on. Like we're bonded, like in some way or another.
Like, and you belong to me.
You belong to me in a one way or another. Yes. And so the toxic person may feel like they have the right to just constantly ask you, be in your business. What are you doing? Where'd you go last night? Things that they shouldn't even be asking you, just out of respect that you moved on.
Something that they should have no privilege to.
Yes, will feel like they have total right to ask you something like that because of the relationship that existed in the past. And if there's children involved, they might even go as far as questioning the children, trying to get information out of the children.
Oh my God.
Absolutely.
This is why our daughter is going to be enrolled in jiu-jitsu, so that she could fucking suplex somebody. Because honestly, when I hear those kind of things, it gets me so fired up as a woman, because from my reading, this obviously happens to more women than men. Women fall victim to these type of toxic relationships where men are physically, verbally, or financially abusing them. And I'm not trying to diminish it happening to men, because it happens to men, but sadly it happens to women more.
Is there a statistic on that?
Yes.
Wow.
Happens to women more.
I see it so differently. And here's why.
It's like and don't quote me on the exact number, but I'm going to give, from what I remember, it's balanced out to not balanced. It's about a 60-40 split.
I'm gonna go out on a limb here, and I'm gonna beg to differ based on a 100% opinion. All right, I'm gonna give an opinion. This is my opinion, and I feel like it holds some weight. All right, I feel like that the statistic is weighed the way that it is because women are more cunning. There's probably a large amount of women out there that just don't get caught doing. They're just so slick and subtle about it that I can see men just being very blunt about being intrusive and being disruptive in their ex's life. But I could see a woman going about it in the complete opposite way, where they're.
Are you trying to say they were slick?
Trying to say women are way slicker than men.
Okay, that being said, the majority of domestic violence happens at the hands of men.
We're not talking about violence here, though.
No, but we're talking about abuse.
No, we're talking about.
Okay, hold on. So the majority of domestic abuse.
You're going somewhere
I know,
where I'm not talking about domestic violence.
No, but I said. Oh, sorry. Let me rephrase that. Domestic abuse, because we said the abuser. We're talking about in a toxic relationship. It could be physical, it could be verbal, or it could be financial, right? So the majority of domestic abuse happens at the hands of men to women. So that leads right into the statistic of when it comes to being in a toxic relationship, whatever type of abuse you're experiencing is happening more to women than it is men.
Okay. So the point that I'm trying to make is that men will be more abrupt about it. They'll be more blunt about what it is that they're doing. A woman will be less aggressive. They'll do it in a slicker way where.
Give me an example.
Where they may, like I feel like they may take more time to do like investigative work to find out what's going on behind the scenes in their ex's life, and try to find out ways where they can interact in a way where it's subtle and it doesn't seem intentional, but it is totally planned and intentional.
Okay, I will give you that.
Okay, so what I'm saying to you is that I'm sure there's way more of that's going on, because that's just something that is not. It's not like a green hat with an orange bill where it just stands out. Where men in this situation, they put on their green hat with the orange bill and they just go head first. You know what I'm saying? And so what you have is you see all these green hat with orange bills. Like, oh my God, look at all these men doing all that stuff. Where as to and this is my opinion, where there could be just the same amount of women doing it, but they're doing it like on a black ops level. You know what I'm saying? Like, you just don't see it happening.
Shout out to the ladies doing shit on the Black Ops level.
You don't see it happening. This shit is completely behind the scenes, but it is active. You know? Like,
oh my God.
There's a whole sub-network of the shit going on.
I think you got feelings about that. I think you got feelings about that.
Yeah, I'm just, this is my humble opinion. That's all it is,
I actually, that'd be an interesting conversation. Women versus men when it comes to some Black Ops shit.
Oh, women got that shit hands down. And there's some crazy women out there that try to obviously they're gonna act like they're abusers at one point, like they're just gonna be like, okay, this is what I know, this is how I'm gonna act, fuck it, he didn't give a fuck, I don't give a fuck, so this is what it is. But I just feel like women are so much more slicker and cunning. Men have the advantage of physical strength. So they use that to their advantage. So when you have women who that's at a disadvantage to them, what they do use is their brain.
Yeah.
Because that is something that.
Yeah, well, throughout history, women had to find a lot of ways to do things behind the back of men.
Exactly.
In order to live.
Yeah. So it's like, it's by default, as women, like, okay, I don't have muscles, at least not to the degree that this man has. So what do I have?
I have this screwdriver and I'm gonna write dickhead on your fucking car. So what I'm gonna do.
You know what I'm saying? Or I'm gonna hand this rusty screwdriver to our son so he can give it to you. Even though he's a toddler, he might fall into you and be like, I don't know how that happened.
What? That's a little extreme.
You know what I'm saying? But these are the things that I'm talking
about.
That's
a little extreme.
But there was a meme that I saw like that where it was actually it was a TikTok where it was like there was a guy underneath the sink and he was handing, like his son was helping him and the mom was recording and like the son picked up a screwdriver and it looked like he was about to stab the dad and it stopped and it froze and then all of a sudden like there was that filter where it's the eyes in somebody else's mouth and they mouth something and like what people have done with that is just crazy ridiculous. Man. I think I showed it to you.
I love social media.
Yeah, I do too.
I really do.
Yeah, so that's where I got that from.
That actually brings us to the end. What a way to wrap this shit up, huh?
Babies and rusty screwdrivers.
Right? Like always, Evo, I had such a great time having this conversation with you. Even though it was like a heavy topic, I feel like you and I just want to let people know that I feel like this show that we have actually helps our relationship because we have to learn how to have these conversations with each other without it getting heated. Yeah. Because there are times that Evo says things to me that sound very misogynistic and I really have to like control the way that I feel. And then there's times that I know that I say things that Evo is like, the fuck did she say? Because we get into it sometimes a little bit before, but we've really learned how to have, some great banter. So that's why I always feel like I have such a great time having this conversation with you. And I want to thank everybody for joining us, whether you are listening to us or you are watching us, however you consume our content, we greatly appreciate you. So how you choose to consume us is, it's not necessarily important to us, but we appreciate it. So now that we're available on literally, I think almost all streaming apps, YouTube, Google, Amazon, Spotify, Apple, I think we've made it pretty easy for you.
Give a like, give a share, give a listen.
Give a subscribe. Give it anything.
Recommend to a friend. Help us grow so that we can continue.
Because I love the people that hit me up and go, yo, I love your show. And I'm like, share it.
But did you share it, though?
Anyway, so that brings us to the end of the show. Until next Friday, ladies and gentlemen, peace out.